Hi, my name is Dr. Felicia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. Part of the work I do is focusing on spiritual abuse and how people can identify it, recover from it, and prevent it. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how spiritually abusive people lie to you about justice. For what I would recommend is that if you haven't watched this video already, I have a video that relates to this, and it's called Spiritual Abuse and the Perversion of Justice. And so if you haven't already, go ahead and watch that video, as it will give this video a little bit more context. So back to the topic at hand. How do spiritually abusive people lie to you about justice? In order to understand this, you have to, first of all, understand the way spiritually abusive people and spiritually abusive environments work. And I talk about this a lot in my videos, but one thing is that they value appearance over authenticity. And so when you start out by pointing out an injustice in a spiritually abusive environment, that defies their narrative that everything is okay, we all look good, we're all perfect, etc. Okay, and so I am when that happens, they are obviously not going to and anytime like an adverse event happens or something happens where an injustice is done and needs to be remedied, they're going to be very reluctant to address that. And when I've worked with individuals who've been through spiritual abuse, they talk about this very frequently, that something happened and justice was not served, or justice was not served properly. So back to the lies that you're told. Something that I have seen is the spiritually abusive people or the environment separating God from justice. Okay. So they'll say things like, well, God is love, and God is loving, but then he also is not. They really try to just separate the two concepts and look at justice as kind of something that we shouldn't think about or worry about right now, because that's not what God does, right? And so that's one of the things that you hear quite frequently in these types of environments. And on the surface, it may sound comforting and it may sound very nice when all you are told about and all that's focused on about God is his love, right? No one wants to be in a situation where they feel like they're always like judged and criticized, and they're serving a God that's like very angry and doesn't love them or anything like that, right? So on the surface it sounds good, but when I think about the harm and the damage that this does and how this perpetuates spiritual abuse, I think about an analogy of a teacher, right? Imagine that you have a teacher that's super nice, super sweet, but they never have or they never enforce any rules, right? And I've also heard about this too from other parents or people who have kids, that this teacher is really nice, but they never enforce any rules. Well, what happens if you're a kid in that environment and you are being bullied, someone's just not treating you well, or you're experiencing harm and hurt and just not having a good experience in that classroom, the teacher is not going to interfere. They're not going to intervene. They may just kind of give whoever the perpetrator is a slap on the wrist, but nothing is done. And that can be damaging. And that is also, abusive, especially when someone's being harmed and nothing's being done about it. This kind of also goes to I talk about this in some other videos, but how some spiritually abusive churches and environments and everything else kind of have this hands-off way of treating problems, right? And so they just don't interfere, and that is just as abusive as an environment where they are inflicting direct harm on people. Okay, so that's one lie that you'll hear from a spiritually abusive environment, that we have to separate justice from God or any type of authority, right? We're all about love, touchy feely, good feelings, that kind of environment and that kind of message makes it difficult or even impossible for anybody to address any wrongs that have been done and get them remedied. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one that you will hear in a spiritually abusive environment is that you are not worthy of justice because you're not perfect, right? And so somebody may bring up an issue or a complaint, say, hey, no, this person did this, right? Maybe it was stealing money, maybe it was slander or libel, whatever the thing is, there's been an injustice that's been done. And so when you address the authority in that environment, they'll say something like, well, you're not perfect. I'm sure you've made mistakes too. We all have to see the best in people, blah, blah, blah. And that is just a deflection, right? Because sure, nobody's perfect, but justice still needs to be addressed. And maybe the environment may not be able to provide legal justice or whatever, but the fact is there needs to be a remedy or an addressing of the situation in that case, and it doesn't happen. So that's one lie that they'll tell you. Another one is they will equate justice with fear, and they'll make it seem like, well, you make yourself a target if you ask for justice, right? And so it's kind of a little challenging to explain, but I'll put it this way. I'll try to explain it this way. So let's say somebody says that this happened and they're bringing it to the attention of whoever it is that is the authority or in leadership at that time. They may say, well, yeah, we can, we can address this, or yeah, something can be done about this, but also, you aren't perfect, and you may also have some sort of consequence for speaking up about this, right? And so that type of lie can be very subtle. It can be very manipulative too, but it basically is telling the person who's coming to get an injustice addressed that they too will like fall under judgment, or they'll have spiritual consequences for bringing up an issue, right? And so I've heard people say things like, well, when I brought this up, I was told that I'm going to fall under judgment too. I'm a judgmental person because, I brought this thing up, right? And so it basically is saying, just leave this alone, right? If you bring this up, then it's going to cause problems for everybody, and we don't want that. And so that's what they're thinking. They're not going to say that. Instead, just going to make you afraid of the consequences of seeking justice. Okay. So another lie that you can be told about justice is that you are a self-righteous person for seeking justice, right? And that kind of goes back to the thing I talked about of being unworthy of receiving justice. But instead of them using that angle, they'll say something like, well, you think that you haven't done anything wrong in life, and you are comparing yourself to this person and thinking you're better, just throwing a lot of stuff in the mix that doesn't belong and isn't true. And the fact is, even if it is true, and I talk about this in one of my other videos about what if the spiritual abuser was right, but let's say for argument's sake, you are a self-righteous person who thinks they're better than anybody else, and that is why you are coming to bring this issue of injustice. It still doesn't negate the fact that an injustice was done. And I think it's really important to remember what is the root issue here. Okay, so, and by the way, if you are enjoying this content, please thumbs up the video, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it. What that does is it just gets similar videos like this out to other people who could benefit from the content. So if you haven't done so already, please do so. It would really mean a lot to me. Okay, so I'm going to go back and review the lies that you are told about justice. Okay, the first one is that that justice is not a part of God's nature, right? God doesn't, God doesn't operate in justice. Okay, so they separate justice from the nature of God. That's the first lie. The second one is that they will try to attack you and specifically say that you are unworthy of justice because you're not a perfect person, right? And so they'll say something like, oh, nobody's perfect. We all miss the mark. No, nobody does it right all the time. And so instead of focusing on what this person did, focus on yourself, right? And look at all the things and bad things that you do every day. And again, this is just shows how spiritually abusive people and environments use a lot of deflecting. I also talk about this in my video about spiritual bypassing. But one thing that these types of environments that people do is that they never address the problem at hand, right? And so in this type of life, when they say, well, you aren't perfect, focus on the things that you do wrong, that's not the problem here. The problem here is that there was an injustice. It was not right, and it needs to be addressed whichever way, it's going to be addressed, right? But they just kind of want to pretend that it's not there. Okay. Another thing is invoking fear, right? And so if justice comes, if we open this Pandora's box of justice, who knows what's going to happen? And you are also going to be under judgment, and God's going to come after you too, or, kind of like a veiled threat. And so there's that one. And then the last one is just attacking your character for desiring justice, right? And so if you say, hey, this is a problem, this is what happened, well, guess what? Now you're self-righteous. Now you think that you're better than everybody else. And if you would just humble yourself, then, this issue would just go away and you wouldn't see the need for justice, okay? And so, and when environments do this, when spiritually abusive people and environments operate in this way, they're doing this because they want to keep in line with the narrative that everything is perfect, right? Appearance is very important to people who are spiritually abusive in these spiritually abusive environments. So it's all about looking perfect on the outside. And sometimes too, I have found that it is, in order to address an injustice that's been done, it takes work, right? It's not easy. You have to you may offend some people. I mean, there's just going to be energy put into that. And something that I have found, from what people have told me and just my own experiences and things like that, is that is something that is looked at as burdensome for these types of environments. Leading, growing people, it is really difficult work. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but there's some challenges with that. And sometimes these environments don't want to admit that they don't have the resources or they're not willing to do this. And that's fine. I'm not expecting that every place you go to, every spiritual environment should also act like I don't know, like a law firm, right? That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that like a good, healthy environment will address the fact that something wrong has been done and try and figure out how to make that wrong right. Right. And so it may involve referring someone to legal services or authorities, but also what can they do on their end to make sure that that person is doing okay. And I have found that when people have brought up injustices and things that have been wrong, that a healthy spiritual environment will make attempts to make things right. And whatever they can't do or whatever they don't have the resources to do, they'll admit it and refer out. Whereas spiritually abusive people and spiritually abusive environments will not do that. And instead of the spotlight being on the issue of what happened that was wrong, the spotlight is now put on that person and just kind of attacking their own character and their own motives in seeking justice. And so if there's anything that I would like for you to take away from this video, when you are in a position where you feel like I'm not being listened to, I'm not being heard, the issue at hand keeps being bypassed or swept under the rug, that is a good indicator that there may be some spiritual abuse going on, right? And so I want you to pay attention to that. And I also, for those of you who have had injustice happen to you and you have basically been turned away or attacked, I want you to remember that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you for seeking justice, right? If there has been injustice that's been done, it doesn't reflect poorly on you as an individual because you are addressing an injustice, right? it's like it's like it's raining outside and you say, oh my goodness, it's raining, and then you are now being told that you are a bad person for pointing out the obvious. And that's kind of something that I've seen a lot in these types of environments, is that when someone points out something that is obvious, right, that everyone else wants to just sweep under the rug or not acknowledge, it's looked at as a bad thing, and that person's character gets attacked. And so if you are in a situation like this where you are seeking justice and you aren't finding it, I'm sorry that that is happening to you. I would just encourage you to go to the appropriate channels. And if you're in that type of environment that is not interested in working with you, then go go somewhere else and try and get that justice remedied, especially if there are legal or not legal, illegal things that have happened. We have to have that type of wisdom and discernment and practicality to go to the right places to get problems addressed. Okay. So I really hope this information helps. If you would like to book a free consultation with me, go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, and click the orange button, or you can also go in the description box and click the button there to do that. All right. I hope you have a wonderful and peaceful day. Bye-bye.